What if I told you that the person you become tomorrow isn't decided by your alarm clock, your morning routine, or even your biggest goals, but by the very last thought that crosses your mind tonight, right as the world fades to black? Most people believe sleep is just a reset button, a pause between days. But that's not what sleep really is. Sleep is not an ending. It's a passage, a silent corridor between the version of you that performed today and the version of you that will wake up tomorrow, slightly different, slightly shaped, slightly more like whatever you carried across that threshold. And here's what almost no one understands. You are not the same person who went to bed. Not really. The unconscious has been working while you rested, not to refresh you, but to complete you, or to trap you, depending on what you brought with you. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear may explain why you wake up heavy on mornings when nothing went wrong, and why for years you've been trying to change your life in the daylight, while the real transformation has been waiting for you in the dark. Part 1. When the mask slips, something else moves. The sun sets, the screens go dark, the last notification dies, and for the first time in 16 hours, there's nothing left demanding your attention. You think the day is over. But Carl Jung saw something else entirely. He believed that sunset isn't the end of your waking life. It's the beginning of a deeper conversation. One you never signed up for, but one you can never escape. Here's what happens when you lie down. During the day, you operate through something Jung called the ego. Not arrogance, he meant the organizing center of your consciousness. The part of you that decides what fits, what matters, what you'll show the world. The ego is your manager. And it's ruthless. To keep you functional, to keep you accepted, to keep you moving through work and relationships without falling apart. The ego filters everything. It pushes aside emotions that feel too weak. It buries desires that contradict your self-image. It silences thoughts that might destabilize the story you tell yourself about who you are. But do you really think those parts just disappear? They don't vanish. They sink, they drop below the surface, into what Jung called the unconscious. Not a trash bin, but a living, breathing foundation beneath everything you think you know about yourself. And here's the catch. During daylight, you're too busy to notice. Work, scrolling, conversations, noise, it all covers the mind like a constant storm on the surface of a lake. You see the waves. You forget there's anything underneath. But at night, when energy drains, when there's no meeting to attend, no message to answer, no reason to keep performing, the ego gets tired. It doesn't collapse, but it lowers its guard. And in that gap, in that quiet space between wakefulness and sleep, the unconscious finally has room to speak. Not in words, not in logic. It speaks through feelings that don't have names, through images that flicker behind your eyes, through old memories that rise without warning, through that vague sense that something is off, even though nothing happened today. Have you ever lain down perfectly fine, only to feel a strange emptiness creep in the moment the lights went out? That's not a problem to fix. That's a message you've been ignoring. Jung wrote something that changed how I understand human behavior. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about that. The feeling that life keeps repeating, the same relationship patterns, the same fears showing up in new situations, the same invisible ceiling you hit, no matter how hard you try. That's not bad luck. That's the unconscious steering you from below, while you tell yourself you're choosing. Here's a simple way to picture this. Imagine your mind as a house. During the day, every light is on. People are moving through rooms. Music is playing. You never notice the basement. But at night, when the house quiets down and the lights dim, the basement doesn't go away. It becomes the only thing you can feel. That basement is your unconscious. And whatever you've locked down there, unprocessed pain, rejected desires, unspoken truths, it doesn't stay silent forever. It knocks. And the moment before sleep is when the knocking gets loudest. But here's what most people do. They run. They pick up their phone. They turn on a video. They fill the silence with anything that will drown out that quiet voice. Sound familiar? The ego's greatest trick isn't controlling you during the day. It's convincing you to never stop long enough to hear what's underneath. But transformation doesn't begin with effort. It begins with listening when you're no longer in control. When the mask slips. When the performance stops. When the ego lowers. That's when the unconscious begins to speak. And if you're quiet enough to hear it, even for 30 seconds, you've just touched the starting point of real change. Part 2. What you carry across the threshold follows you. Most people think sleep is a hard stop. Day ends. Night begins. Tomorrow is a blank page. But Jung would disagree. He saw no separation between evening and morning. He saw a continuous current. And whatever emotional state you're in when you cross into sleep doesn't disappear. It becomes the soil your tomorrow grows from. Let me say that again. The feeling you fall asleep with doesn't vanish into nothing. It sinks into the unconscious, where it spends the next 6 to 8 hours being processed, deepened, and woven into the background tone of your entire next day. Have you ever woken up already tired? Before you've even sat up? Before anything has gone wrong? That's not random. That's not just poor sleep quality. That's the state you carried across the threshold last night, returning to you like a shadow you forgot you brought. Here's what's fascinating. During the day, you're a master of avoidance. Something uncomfortable arises? You get busy. You scroll. You rationalize. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later. But the unconscious doesn't understand later. It doesn't divide life into separate compartments. For the unconscious, everything is one continuous river. What hasn't been emotionally completed doesn't disappear when you close your eyes. It only sinks deeper and continues influencing you from below. Jung called dreams the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. But here's what that actually means. Dreams aren't random noise. They're not your brain defragmenting like a hard drive. Dreams are the unconscious continuing to process whatever you refuse to finish during the day. And whether you remember your dreams or not, that processing leaves traces. In your mood when you wake, in your patience, or lack of it, in the way you respond to small frustrations, in whether you feel spacious or clenched before your feet even hit the floor. Have you ever noticed that two people can wake up to the exact same circumstances, same weather, same inbox, same problems, and one feels crushed while the other feels steady? That difference isn't circumstance. It's the state they carried into sleep. Now here's something most people misunderstand completely. The unconscious doesn't judge states as good or bad. It doesn't have a moral compass. It only registers one thing: familiarity. If you frequently fall asleep in tension, the unconscious learns that tension is normal. It treats tension as the baseline, and the next day, it continues maintaining that baseline, not to hurt you, but because that's the environment it is adapted to. If you frequently fall asleep feeling insufficient, the unconscious accepts insufficiency as your natural state, and it will guide your perceptions, your reactions, and your choices to fit that state. This is why so many people feel stuck in loops they can't explain. They try hard during the day. They set goals. They affirm positive beliefs. They act differently. But at night, they still end the day with the same old feeling. And the unconscious, loyal to what's familiar, pulls them right back into the same rhythm. Not because they aren't trying, but because they're working on the surface, while the roots are being fed every single night. Here's a practical image. Think of the unconscious as a garden you never see. You don't plant seeds during the day. You just live your life. But every night, whatever emotional state you fell asleep with becomes water for that garden. If you water it with anxiety, anxiety grows. If you water it with quiet resentment, resentment deepens its roots. If you water it with exhaustion, exhaustion becomes your default soil. So what's growing in your garden right now? And more importantly, who's doing the watering? Jung didn't believe in forcing yourself to think positively before bed. He wasn't naive about the power of suppression. What he suggested was much simpler and much harder. Take 3 minutes before sleep. No phone. No distraction. Just sit with one question. What state is actually present in me right now? Not what you want to feel. Not what you should feel. Not what you'll deal with tomorrow. What is here? Anxiety? Exhaustion? Emptiness? A strange mix you can't name? Naming it isn't about controlling it. It's about stopping the automatic process of carrying it unconsciously. When a state becomes conscious, even just acknowledged, it begins to lose its silent power over you. Not because it vanishes, but because you're no longer being driven by something you refuse to see. This single practice changes the threshold. Instead of sleep being a tunnel where you lose control, it becomes a crossing where you bring awareness. And when you do this long enough, something shifts. Mornings start to feel different. Not because life got easier, but because the inner current has been quietly adjusted. The moment before sleep isn't the end of your day. It's the very quiet beginning of your tomorrow. And night by night, you're planting something into your life. What have you been planting without realizing it? If you recognize a familiar state that you carry into sleep most nights, share it in the comments. Not for me. For the person reading who thought they were alone in that feeling. Part 3. The darkness only appears when you stop running. There's a moment that catches everyone off guard. You put the phone down. You turn off the last light. You settle into stillness. And instead of peace, instead of the relief you expected, something else rises. Darkness. Not the darkness outside, the darkness inside. Thoughts you've been dodging all day. Emotions you labeled as negative. Parts of yourself you've learned to sidestep so automatically that you forgot they were there. And here's what most people get wrong. They think this darkness appears because something is wrong with them. It's the opposite. The darkness appears because you finally stop distracting yourself. And distraction is the most common survival strategy of the modern mind. Think about your day. Work follows work. Screen follows screen. Sound follows sound. The moment an uncomfortable feeling rises, ping, you find something else to look at. Not because you're shallow, because you've learned to exist that way. Distraction keeps you from falling apart. In many cases, it's necessary. But at night, in the silence before sleep, distraction stops working. The phone is dark, the world is quiet, your body is slowing down. And the things you've been running from all day, they don't need to chase you anymore. You've stopped moving. Jung called this collected presence the shadow. And before you imagine something evil, understand what he actually meant. The shadow isn't your dark side in a villainous sense. It's the collection of everything you've excluded from your self-image because it didn't fit. Emotions you decided were bad. Desires you believed you shouldn't have. Impulses that made you feel ashamed. Weakness you couldn't afford to show. Contradictions that would break the story of who you are. During the day, you don't see your shadow because the light of busyness is too bright. But when that light turns off, the shadow doesn't appear because it's new. It appears because for the first time, it's no longer hidden. Have you ever felt uncomfortable in complete silence? Not scared of the dark outside, but uneasy with what might surface inside. That's not weakness. That's honesty trying to happen. Jung said something that sounds radical but is actually deeply practical. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Read that again. Maturity doesn't come from only focusing on the positive. It comes from daring to see the parts you've rejected. Because what you refuse to look at is what has the strongest power to control you. There's an ancient Greek myth that illustrates this perfectly. Persephone doesn't descend into the underworld because she's weak. She descends because it's part of a cycle. And only after spending time in the darkness below does she become a queen instead of remaining an innocent girl. The myth isn't warning you to fear the underworld. It's reminding you that some dimensions of maturity only happen when you dare to step into unfamiliar regions of yourself. From a modern neuroscience perspective, this makes perfect sense. When your brain is no longer stimulated by external input, something called the default mode network becomes more active. That's the system related to self-reflection, memory, and your sense of self. In other words, when you stop distracting yourself, your brain automatically turns inward. And what gets processed in that state? Not your to-do list. Not your wins. The unresolved things, the incomplete emotional loops, the questions you've been avoiding. So the darkness doesn't appear because you're thinking negatively. It appears because you're finally quiet enough to hear what's been overlooked. This is why so many people fear silence. They fear turning off the music. They fear lying still. They fear doing nothing. Not because they're lazy, but because deep down, they know that without distraction, they'll have to face something. Here's a comparison that might help. During the day, your mind is like a room with bright fluorescent lights and constant activity. You don't notice the corners, but when night comes, the lights go off. The room empties. And those corners don't disappear. They just become visible. Are the corners more dangerous at night? Or are they just more honest? What Jung emphasized isn't that you must dig into the shadow by force. He didn't encourage self-torture or obsessive negativity. What he said is much simpler. Stop running. When you stop distracting yourself, the shadow appears on its own. And when it appears, your job isn't to fight it or fix it. Just acknowledge it. No judgment. No rushed interpretation. Just recognition. This too is a part of me. The shadow often shows up as feelings you've avoided for years. Envy, resentment, fear of not being enough, quiet rage at people who've hurt you, longing for something you told yourself you didn't want. During the day, you push these down with reasons. But at night, reasons don't work. Feelings don't need permission to exist, and here's what happens if you stay with that feeling, just for a few breaths. Behind every shadow emotion, there's a need that hasn't been heard, a part of you that hasn't been acknowledged, a younger version of yourself who learned that this feeling wasn't allowed. Many people mistakenly believe that facing the shadow will make them worse. Jung saw the opposite. He believed that not facing it is what makes the shadow dangerous. Because when it's pushed into the unconscious for years, it doesn't disappear. It finds other ways to express itself. Through your reactions, through your patterns, through choices you don't understand. Ever snapped at someone and thought, where did that come from? That's the shadow speaking when you weren't listening. When you stop distracting yourself, the shadow doesn't appear to punish you. It appears to be integrated. It wants to be brought into the light of consciousness, where it no longer has to control you from behind closed doors. And the moment before sleep, when everything slows down, is one of the few times you have this chance. This part doesn't ask you to solve your shadow tonight. It just asks you to notice. If silence makes you uncomfortable, if doing nothing makes you anxious, that might not be a problem to fix. It might be a message to hear. The darkness only appears when you stop distracting yourself. And when you dare to stay with it, even for a brief moment, you've begun to enter a deeper layer of understanding who you are. Because no wholeness is built from light alone, and no journey of maturity happens without passing through the dark regions of the soul. Part 4. The last image of the day becomes the person you wake up as. Something remarkable happens when you stop running from your own darkness, when you stop filling the night with distraction, when you stop numbing the silence. The mind shifts. It stops processing scattered emotions and fragmented memories, and it begins to hold on to something else. An image. Not a picture in the visual sense. An inner image. A felt sense of who you are, of how you exist in the world, of where you stand in relation to everything that matters. And that final image, the one right there as you cross into sleep, is what shapes the person you become tomorrow morning. Have you ever noticed that some mornings you wake up feeling small? Not because anything bad happened, just contracted, like you're already behind, like you're already not enough. And other mornings, with no obvious change in circumstances, you wake up feeling steady, open, like there's room to breathe. Where does that difference come from? Jung believed that the human mind doesn't operate primarily through logic. It operates through images and symbols. Daytime consciousness likes to analyze, label, and explain. But the unconscious doesn't speak in arguments. It speaks in images. And the moment before sleep, when your conscious mind is tired, the unconscious has a chance to place a background image into you. Not a clear picture, just a feeling-toned sense of, who am I when everything settles down? Here's a question most people never ask themselves. Before falling asleep tonight, what image do you usually carry about yourself? A person who's always one step behind life? A person who's not quite good enough? A person who's trying but exhausted? A person who's fundamentally alone? A person who's learning to accept themselves, even with many things still incomplete? You don't need to answer out loud. The unconscious has already answered for you. It's been leaving that background image in your mind every night for years. I once worked with someone who was highly successful by any external measure, respected at work, financially stable, surrounded by people who admired him. But every night before sleep, he told me, a familiar image appeared. He was standing alone at the edge of a field. Behind him was a long road he'd already walked. Ahead was fog, thick, impenetrable. No tragedy, just a quiet loneliness. He thought it was just fatigue, just an overactive imagination. But the next morning, every single day, he woke up with the unshakable feeling that he had to carry everything himself, that he couldn't rely on anyone. No one taught him that feeling. No single event created it. It was shaped by the last image he carried into sleep, repeated night after night, year after year. What image have you been carrying without realizing it? From Jung's perspective, this isn't random. The unconscious uses these images to create what he called an attitude toward life, the fundamental way you stand in relation to the world. Whether you feel supported or abandoned, whether you feel expansive or contracted, whether you feel like life is happening to you or flowing through you. The last image of the day acts like a negative template. When you wake up, every new experience gets printed onto that template. This is why two people can wake up to identical circumstances, same weather, same challenges, same news, and respond completely differently. Their inner background image is different. Jung wrote that dreams are spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will. Which means the images that arise before sleep or during dreams aren't things you choose. They're things that emerge. And what they reveal isn't what you think you're feeling. It's where you're actually standing in your inner life. Think of it like setting a wallpaper on your phone. During the day, you open dozens of apps. You scroll through endless content. You watch videos, read messages, check updates. But every time you return to the home screen, the background image is still there. You might not look at it directly, but it's always present. It's the context for everything else you see. The last image of your day works exactly the same way. It doesn't occupy all of your awareness, but it's the background on which every other thought appears. Here's what's notable. This image isn't always negative. Some people, even under enormous pressure, carry a very different image before sleep. They're walking slowly but not lost. They don't know the exact destination, but they know they're moving. The next morning, they wake up not with excitement, but with a steadiness that's hard to explain. Not because they're pretending everything is fine, but because their inner background image is movement instead of stuckness. Jung believed that deep psychological transformation doesn't begin by changing your circumstances. It begins by changing your inner image. When that image shifts, your attitude toward life shifts with it. And here's what's interesting. You don't have to force a new image. More important than inventing something positive is simply recognizing what image is automatically appearing each night. Because that image is the unconscious telling you something true about where you are. The last image of the day is often very simple. It might just be a feeling of always chasing something, or standing still while the world moves, or shrinking back from what you actually want. But that simplicity is exactly what gives it power. The unconscious doesn't need complex stories. It needs one strong symbol that represents your state of living. And when that symbol repeats, night after night, it becomes normal. It becomes invisible. It becomes the water you don't realize you're swimming in. If you wake up for many days in a row with the same familiar feeling of heaviness, it may not be because your life isn't changing. It may be because your last image hasn't changed. And Jung would say there can be no true awakening if the unconscious background image stays the same. Now this is critical. Jung did not believe in forcing fake positive images. He wasn't advocating for self-hypnosis or toxic positivity. What he emphasized was making the existing image conscious. Recognize it. Stay with it. Ask quietly, what is this image saying about how I'm living? When an image becomes conscious, it begins to shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but enough that you're no longer being shaped by it in a blind, automatic way. The last image of the day isn't just a product of fatigue. It's an honest mirror reflecting your relationship with yourself. And the person you wake up as each morning isn't random. It's the person shaped by that image, repeated, refined, deepened, night after night. So what's the last image you want to carry tonight? If this video touched something you've been carrying alone, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Some things don't need to be explained. Just pass to the right person at the right time. Part 5. Every night is a quiet step back to yourself. By now, you might be sensing something different about how change actually happens. Life doesn't turn in a new direction because of one big decision. It doesn't transform through daytime effort alone. What truly shapes who you become over time happens in very quiet, very small moments, repeated so often you barely notice them. And every night when you close the door on a lived day, you're stepping onto exactly that kind of journey. The journey back to yourself. Jung called this process individuation. It sounds complicated, but it simply means becoming who you actually are. Not the version most accepted by society. Not the version your family expected. Not the version you perform to feel safe. The most whole version. And here's what almost no one tells you. Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means no longer being split. No longer living only from the parts allowed to appear in public, while the rest gets pushed into the shadows. It means the exile parts coming home. But here's the crucial thing. This journey doesn't happen through force. It happens through permission. Permission to stay with yourself, especially in the moments no one sees. During the day, you're forced to face outward. You react to the world. You adapt to circumstances. You hold your roles. You have to be someone. But at night, when the roles fall away, when there's no one to impress, no one to perform for, The person behind the mask finally has space to breathe. And every time you allow yourself to end a day without running from what's left behind, you're moving closer to your real self. This journey isn't loud. There's no victory music, no milestone that says I'm done. It's more like walking through fog. You can't see far ahead, but each step takes you away from where you used to be. And every night, whether you're aware of it or not, you're still walking. The question isn't whether you're on the journey. The question is whether you recognize that you are. Jung himself lived this. After his painful split from Freud, after achieving fame in the scientific world, he entered a period of deep inner crisis. By day, he was still a respected scholar. But at night, he faced dreams, images, and emotions so intense that even he was disoriented. Instead of suppressing or avoiding, Jung chose to stay with what appeared at night. He recorded it, drew it, dialogued with it. Those experiences became the Red Book, not a scientific text, but a map of the journey back inward. He didn't escape the darkness in one night. He moved through it night by night. And that shows a profound truth. The journey back to yourself isn't a journey upward. It's a journey inward. And the deeper you go, the more you realize you don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop moving away from yourself. Modern psychology confirms this from another angle. The deepest integrative processes of the mind don't happen when you're constantly stimulating your brain with information, goals, and action. They happen when your nervous system is allowed to slow down, when you're no longer reacting, when the fight or flight calms. That's when the brain begins reconnecting parts of experience that were separated. Sleep, and especially the minutes before sleep, is the natural environment for that process. Not to fix you, but to bring your parts back into one whole. Have you ever noticed that after a period of simply resting, not solving, just being, you feel more like yourself? That's integration happening beneath the surface. Jung wrote a sentence that cuts straight to the core of this entire journey. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not success, not recognition, not accumulation. Becoming yourself." And here's what that actually means. Becoming yourself isn't about adding something new. It's about gradually removing layers that aren't yours, roles you've worn too long, images you adopted to survive, but that no longer reflect who you are, defenses that once protected you but now just weigh you down. Each night, when you lie down with no one to prove anything to, no goal to achieve, no question of what do I have to do next, you move a little closer to the part of you that doesn't need to perform. That part might feel fragile. It might not know how to speak clearly, but it's real. And it's the repetition of these quiet, honest moments, night after night, that creates the biggest change. Not changing your personality, changing your relationship with yourself. Many people think an inner journey requires complex methods, elaborate exercises, or intense breakthrough moments. Jung saw it differently. He believed the most important thing isn't technique, it's steady presence. Staying with yourself long enough to stop fearing what appears. And sleep, in the most natural way possible, creates that space for you every single day, without requiring you to do anything grand. You don't need to understand yourself completely. You don't need to resolve every inner conflict. The journey back doesn't demand perfection. It demands one thing: honesty. Honesty with the feeling left after a day. Honesty with the last image you carry when you close your eyes. Honesty with the distance between the person you're living as and the person you actually are. Here's a simple practice for this phase. Before sleep tonight, place one hand on your chest. Breathe evenly. Give yourself 3 minutes to just stop. Feel the breath rising and falling beneath your hand. Feel your body being present. No need to adjust your state. No need to reach anything. Just stay still with what's present, whether clear or vague. That full presence in silence is already a small but real step on the journey back to yourself. You may not see results right away, but over time, you'll notice subtle changes. You respond more slowly to things that used to hurt you. You strain less in familiar roles. You no longer need to prove so much that you're fine. You begin to feel more inside life rather than just running through it. Those changes don't come from daytime determination. They come from the integration happening at night. So each night isn't an escape from life. It's a return. A return to the part of you that doesn't need to be fixed, only acknowledged. And when you begin to see sleep this way, you'll stop seeing it as emptiness. You'll see it as very quiet, very steady footsteps on the journey back to yourself. Not loud, not showy, but deep enough that at some point, maybe not tonight, maybe not next week, you'll realize you're no longer as far from yourself as you used to be. Conclusion. So here's what I want you to take with you. Your life isn't truly decided by what you do between sunrise and sunset. It's decided by how you end each day. The moment before sleep when every role falls away. When there's no need to prove or perform or control. You stand closer to your real self than at any other time. And that moment, repeated long enough, quietly shapes the person you wake up as tomorrow morning. Carl Jung didn't see change as a loud breakthrough. He saw transformation as a quiet process in which consciousness gradually learns to listen to the unconscious. Not to dominate it, not to fear it, to listen. Each night, when you stop distracting yourself, when you stop running from what's left behind, you allow the neglected parts of you to return. And when the real self is present long enough, life cannot help but change direction. You don't need to think of anything grand before sleep. You don't need to solve your entire life in the dark. The only thing you need to carry is honesty. Honesty about the feeling that's present. Honesty about the image living in you. Honesty about the distance between the person you're living as and the person you truly are. Jung believed that this honesty, not positive thinking, not strong willpower, not relentless effort, is the foundation of a whole life. So tonight, when you turn off the last light, when the world goes quiet, instead of reaching for your phone, instead of running from the silence, just stop, breathe, feel what's there, and let that small, honest moment be the beginning. Because sometimes, changing just one thing before you go to sleep is enough for your entire life to begin changing. If this video made you pause, really pause, press like. It helps more people find this when they're ready to hear it. And if you want to continue exploring the deeper layers of the mind, the unconscious, and the journey back to yourself, subscribe. There's more to come. Sleep well. Not just to rest, but to return.